So Hackathon Happiness. First of all, you're incredibly lucky because what it means is that during the weekend, you have access to Huawei tools. So all of the toys of the suite, and in particular, the focus will be on HMS Core and the suite of developer tools, whether it is the location kit, the drive kit, the scan kit, the map kit, as well as the machine learning kit for vision recognition and language processing. I would encourage you all, before you take part in the hackathon, to go to the Huawei Developer Tools website and look at the particular tools that you are interested in yourself. So for example, if you have a particular interest in developing a mapping technology, so for example, learning how to drop a pin onto the map and then annotating that pin with some information and some images about that location, then make sure that you learn the map kit. If your interest is in doing a language application, so for example, translating from English into Chinese or into French, or one of the 19 languages supported by Huawei's machine learning language apps, then take a look at the ML kit. I would also encourage you to go onto GitHub to look at the augmented reality engine, which is amazing, mostly because obviously we are working towards getting onto the metaverse and AR, VR applications. And it's well worth your time going onto GitHub to study the documentation before the hackathon so that you become familiar with both the utility as well as the potential bugs that might be there, so that on the day of the hackathon, you're not suddenly thrown into a situation where you can't use a particular tool because you weren't aware of, as it were, the bug situation with the tool. But you're very lucky because during hackathon, you will have access to all of these toys. So make good use of that weekend to actually learn about HMS Core. The other thing before the hackathon is to be aware of Huawei's values, because typically during a hackathon, your focus might only be on whether or not you have the technology and the tools to build something. But in actual fact, it's really important to understand the values of a company, the brand values, the soul values, as well as what Huawei stands for. The reason it's important to understand a company's values is because it can actually help you to make a better product. So in the case of Huawei, Huawei is committed to ecological civilization and cultural inclusion. This is something that we can see in every single Huawei video and in a lot of the products and the applications that are successful within Huawei App Gallery. So as an example, sustainability. You can go onto YouTube and look at the amazing products that Rainforest Connection has collaborated with Huawei Cloud to implement in Indonesia, in Costa Rica, across, different areas of rainforests to help to both monitor against loggers as well as to learn about animal sounds. So using machine learning kit to learn about animal sounds so that we can protect the ecology much better. Another example is accessibility. So you can look at StorySign and how Neil Peimer of Aardman Animations he was a creative director at Aardman Animations, how he collaborated with Huawei to develop this application to enable hearing impaired children to actually read text so that the AI could actually translate the text into sign language for them. Another example is in terms of humanity. So please take a look at all of the types of tech for all education apps that have been created in collaboration with Huawei team. Understanding a company's values, their brand values, their soul values is important for product, because what it means is it reminds us that every single technology that we build is for each other, for society, and as much as possible to ensure that the technology is sustainable and that we're handing good technologies down through the generations. So yes, the hackathon is a lot of fun, but also bear in mind, the values that we're trying to imbue the products and the technologies with. So the broad overview of my talk will be divided into two parts. The first part will be about principles. So the principle of diversity of team, the principle of open-hearted exploration, the principle of gracious learning. And then there will also be the second part, which will be about practices. So team, product, and technology SWOT. So SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Another practice is fuel and fun. And the final practice is adaptive iteration. So principle 1, diverse teams win. Now, sometimes within the technology field, it can be very male oriented, or it can be very engineering oriented. My tip, my gold nugget would be to make sure that your team is diverse, not only in terms of whether somebody is from Asia Pacific or Europe or North America on your team, but also in terms of diversity of mind and diversity of skill set. So make sure that you have an engineer, you have somebody from social sciences, you have a designer, you have a product person, and you have somebody who's simply good fun, right, on your team. Because the teams that don't win, often it's because they're too homogenous. So they're only engineers, or they are only designers who can't build product, who can't code the demo prototype. So make sure that you have a diverse team in terms of diversity of cultures, diversity of minds, and diversity of technical as well as creative skills. So with my teams, I'll give an example. In 2017 at IBM Cognitive Fair Builder, I was one of the few female engineers in the room. And there were lots of different people from different backgrounds, some of whom could code, some of whom couldn't code, were just, designers, some were just humanities students. And I managed to create a team where there was a good mixture of software engineers, product designers, people who were simply fun, who had never coded before. And we ended up winning with an app that's called What's Art, which was a mapping app for different art and graffiti that we would see around the city. And so what would happen in the app is that we would put a pin down onto the map and then be able to add a picture to it and annotate it, as well as a voice recording that we could then do speech recognition with. So that's the example from the IBM hackathon. And then with the Fleur hackathon, we developed a wearable using an infrared camera lens attached to a Raspberry Pi board that we literally put onto a wristband and strapped onto one of our team members. And that wearable is essentially to alert visually impaired people when they're approaching a hot object so that they could avoid the hot object and stay safe within their home. So not touch, for example, boiling kettles. The third one was where we used the Ricoh camera, the HP Idol AI stack, and Microsoft Cortana, essentially to track what politicians were saying and then do emotion recognition on those politicians. So in all of those examples, my teams were a diverse mix of product people, designers, and software engineers. So remember this, diverse teams win. Do not necessarily stay only with people that you know. In actual fact, you may learn more and you increase your opportunity of winning and learning if you collaborate with people you've never met before, right? So remember this, do not automatically go and look for the most homogenous like you person in the room. Go and find somebody you've never spoken to and learn with them during the hackathon. And remember, diverse teams win. So that's the first principle. So again, with the Fleur hackathon, this is a photo taken of one of my team members where we were testing whether or not our Fleur sensor could detect hot objects. And I ended up having to physically go to an electronics store because we had some of the kit and we didn't have, parts of the breadboard and different wires and things like that. So something to bear in mind and to remember is that there is no job, right, which is too unnecessary. And everybody on the team is a dog's body, right? So I mean this in the nicest possible way, that you have to let go of all of your egos, right? Everybody on the team has to chip in and do what's necessary for the team to learn and to make progress in terms of getting the prototype as good as possible. So when I say diverse teams win, I also mean diversity in terms of letting go of your ego and doing what is necessary for the team. Principle 2, open-hearted exploration. When we're students and even well into our careers, there are people who in their 50s and 60s who maybe they're managers in a technology company, but they will be incredibly shy. Do never, ever assume that all of us are confident and all of us know everything. This is a fallacy, right? All of us are shy and all of us do not know everything. That is why we're at hackathons, to learn with each other. Remember, go and speak to the shyest person in the room. Ask them what their opinion is. And as the shyest person in the room, this is your opportunity to share your thoughts and also to learn to be less shy. Because hackathons, like life, are about overcoming our shyness, our fears, and exploring possibilities together. All of us are shy. All of us do not know. We're at hackathons to learn with each other. We're there to be open-hearted in exploring the possibilities with people. People, maybe some people that we know, oftentimes with people we don't know. And that is a great way of developing ourselves, is always to remember that hackathons, like life, are all about people and learning with each other. We will also learn about new technologies, because a lot of the technologies may not be known to us. So what I have on screen is an example of when Hewlett-Packard released their Haven on Demand. And at the time, there wasn't a single access point to show text generation, as well as vision recognition, as well as translation on the same screen. So for all of us in the hackathon room, this was completely new information. So always be open-hearted about the fact that there will be new people and there will be new technology materials to learn on the fly in the hackathon, right? And the more open-hearted you are, the more willing you will be to explore. It is not only about what you technically know, right? It is about being open-hearted to exploring the possibilities within the hackathon with each other. Now, principle 3, gracious learning. Gracious learning is important because it is not true that we go to hackathons to win. There have been hackathons I've been at where there are 1,000 people, okay? So that was the largest hackathon, which was Developer Week. There are 1,000 people, maybe 600 people in the room, and then 400 people remote, which means that there are lots of amazingly brilliant engineers, product people, designers, right, amongst the 1,000 people. So don't go to a hackathon just aiming to win. This is not the good expectation to set for yourself or for your team, right? So bear that in mind, is that your team may not win the competition. If you set your expectations too high, what can happen is that the disappointment can then mean that you don't want to take part anymore in any future hackathons, or you don't want to do any more technology. So always go in with the open-hearted exploration that you are there to do gracious learning. Even if you do not win the competition, you manage the team so that you are gracious and you applaud the success of each other, and you learn from the success of each other, because the more that you do gracious learning, this increases the chances that at some point in a hackathon, you will win, right? So the winning part of a hackathon is actually how much gracious learning you have done in the hackathon, right? That's actually the secret, right? That's a secret source of all hackathons, is that the more gracious learning you do, the more likely you are to win the hackathon, right? So those are the 3 core principles, right? Diverse teams win, okay? The second one is, make sure you're talking to the shy people, right? And the third principle is gracious learning. So in practice, in practical terms, when you're trying to form your team, again, remember, do not automatically go to your friends all the time. Make sure you are speaking with other people in the room that you might not have met yet, right? Might not have met them in college, might not have met them, within Huawei circles. Always remember that the hackathon is an opportunity to meet people and to learn with them. So once you're starting to create your team, try to identify what we call SWOT on them. So strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. In terms of what are their strengths technically, so are they all software engineers, or are they all product people, or are they all designers, or are they there in terms of as glue, essentially, to hold the team together? Early on, as much as possible, try to identify the person who gets on with most members of the team, right? So the person who is most able to communicate with each of the team members, and try to identify that person so that you can appoint them as field marshal, right? Or essentially project manager for the build, right? So try to speak with different people in the room and source designers, product people, humanities people, and the actual software engineers to build that diverse team. And then within that team, try to identify what are the types of skills they're really good at. And also try to set some stretch goals, right? So for example, if you have somebody who typically does design, but is interested in learning, for example, to do some coding, give them the opportunity to do software engineering, right? And support them. Find another software engineer on the team to support them. Because remember, a key principle of the hackathon is to learn with each other. So do not assume that, you're there just to win and you only choose the strongest software engineer or the strongest designer, right? The opportunity is essentially to cross-pollinate the learning with each other. So do your team SWOT and then try to build a team that can communicate well and get on well with each other for the 48 hours of the hackathon. So the photo I'm showing is of my team where, and I didn't realize this, but the IBM Watson people took a photo of me as I was planning the product, as well as identifying who on the team, would most enjoy tackling that particular part of our product build. So that's me at the whiteboard, surrounded by the guys, and we're all chipping in essentially about who should do which part of the build. And then there is also product SWOT. So you can try to use a Kanban board or something like Miro. You can find it miro.com. And this is a typical, essentially, collaboration board that teams can use to brainstorm, as well as identify who the product is for. So think about when you're making your prototype, your app prototype, the persona of the person that you're building this app for. Remember, always put the human at the center of everything, whether it is your hackathon team or whether it is your product app itself. So think about the persona of who you're making the app for, their personality, their interests. What are the skills that you need to put in to make this a good product for humans, right? So try to do a product SWOT. All of this can be within a time frame that works for the team. So take as long as you need for the team to actually understand what product it is that you all want to build together. And then there is tech SWOT. So with technology stacks, there are two clear areas of the stack. The first is the front end, which typically is the design, the user interface that consumers will interact with. And that has a very different discipline and practice to the back end. So the front end technologies are typically something like HTML5, Bootstrap, Angular, React, Node.js. So before the hackathon, if you are familiar with the front-end technologies, just make sure that you brushed up on them. If you're not familiar with them, try to learn about them before the hackathon, if you can. Try to practice. There are different videos on YouTube for each of the front-end technologies that can show you and how to, for example, put some CSS script onto a browser, onto your own dedicated browsers. And then there is the back end. So where you have your databases and you need to be able to do script essentially that can enable your database to communicate with the front end. So for example, if you have a designer who has designed that the user needs to input a piece of information into a text box, the designer can make a beautiful text box using a combination of HTML5 and CSS, right? Beautiful input text box. But when the user puts in their information in the text box, it then needs to be able to go into the database in the back end, right? So for that to happen, there needs to be, for example, some type of Python command, right? That then tells the front end, take that piece of text from the front end, the user interface, and put it into the database. And then also maybe to take a piece of information, for example, an image file from the back end, from the database, and surface it onto the front end. So your designer and your software engineers need to be able to communicate clearly with each other what the data flow from the front end to the back end is. So make sure that on your team, in terms of with the designer and the software engineer, that they are clear which of the technologies they're using, right? And why they want to use that technology or explore using that technology. What will happen during the hackathon is that you may discover that, for example, there is an integration problem between the front end and the back end. So there have been hackathons where, for example, my designers created this beautiful, amazing, user interface, and there would be an issue with the lamp stack, and then we would be trying to essentially troubleshoot it for 3 hours, right? And most of it was to do with the fact that the people who were providing that particular code for the lamp stack had made an error, right? And so then we have to decide, well, if that's the case, do we abandon the whole project, or do we try and find a different backend technology, right? So part of the hackathon can be where you end up troubleshooting somebody else's code from one of the technology companies' code, or just so that you can complete your prototype that you've gone, 16 hours deep into, and you need to put in an extra 2 hours to troubleshoot somebody else's code. Or what you can decide is, well, let's just build something different with a different technology. So try to make sure that you do some SWOT, so some strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats in terms of assessing the front end and back end technologies before you go into the hackathon. It doesn't necessarily mean that you want to be able to win, right, the hackathon. It might just purely be an interesting exercise to troubleshoot the bugs in somebody else's technologies, right? So that's for your team to decide, in the moment. Something that's really important about hackathons is to make sure that away from the design and the coding and trying to get the product together, is that hackathons are about fun, right? And bonding, right? Because they can be really intense in some areas. You can be arguing, and there will be arguments, and understand that arguments are healthy. Never, ever think that if your team is arguing that everything is lost. In actual fact, the more arguments or disagreements that your team has about the design, about which technologies you're using, how the user flow is, it's actually healthier for the team. Now, during those arguments, it can help to take a breather and go and eat together, because sometimes people can argue because they feel a bit wretched because they haven't got enough brain fuel. So always in the hackathon, be sensitive and be considerate to your team, and make sure that everybody is well fed and has enough caffeine, has enough, whether it's coffee or Gatorade or Coca-Cola or whatever, or apple juice. Make sure that you're eating together and, having those debates about the product together. Never ever shy away from disagreeing with your team about the product that you're building or what you're learning with each other. Because as Steve Jobs himself has said, when they were making Apple products, his philosophy was that all of us are rough stones, right? And so remember this metaphor. Steve Jobs himself talked about Apple products and their teams as rough stones inside a washing machine, right? And every time that there was friction between them, so these rough stones, colliding against each other and disagreeing with each other in this washing machine, in this cycle, this agile cycle of them making product, the more friction there was, eventually it became beautiful, round, smooth stones, okay? And we all know how Apple products are amazing products. Well, as Steve Jobs said, that is due to all of the friction and disagreements in the team, right? That produced those beautiful, round, smooth stones. So embrace the disagreements, but learn from them with each other, and make sure that when you're doing those disagreements and learning, make sure that you have sufficient fuel. And always remember that the disagreements are only about the product. They're not disagreements about each other on a personal level, right? Because always remember to respect each other as people, but disagree about the product and about the technology, right? That's healthy. So make sure that you have food together, you break bread together, and when the team is tired, you collectively go out and get fresh air together. If necessary, do the craziest dance that you have ever done. Video yourselves if you like it, because you will be able to look back at it and laugh and remember those wonderful feelings that you had knowing that you were with people, maybe even with strangers, enjoying yourselves at the hackathon, because that is what ultimately is important, is what you learn at the hackathon. How much gracious learning do you do at the hackathon? And how much do you enjoy your time with people that maybe you've never met before? Because always the technology is about learning with other people. So the final slide is about the practice of adaptive iteration. A hackathon is compressed in terms of it's a compression into 48 hours of a technology project that maybe in the corporate environment might take 3 months to 6 months, sometimes even 18 months to build, right? So when I worked in banking, so at UBS, I created and delivered the e-intelligence platform for UBS Bank across the world. And those types of projects can take months, even years to deliver, right? But a hackathon is your opportunity to build a small app, a working prototype within 48 hours. So what you have to do is figure out how to do very rapid adaptive iteration, right? So all of your team members have to become almost like Da Vinci, right? So in terms of pitching in together, remember, everybody is, there must be no egos on the team. Everybody is a dog's body, right? So remember that you're like Da Vinci in terms of open-hearted exploration, right? And being creative in your design, in your product, and in your engineering. Typically, the iterative teams will do well, because what it means is that you're being creative and adaptive, right? So you're cycling through ideas, and as soon as you've coded something and you've all examined it and discussed it, and there's a consensus that this isn't really quite working. If I was a consumer, if I was the end user, it just wouldn't feel right. Always go with how the product feels, right? If the product does not feel right, then as quickly as possible, change your product idea, okay? Don't only go with, oh yeah, you know, it's the most technically brilliant thing in the world, right? If the product doesn't feel right to you, as you step into the shoes of you as a consumer and as the end user, then that product is unlikely to win, okay? Always make sure that the product feels as if a consumer would use it. So try to iterate on this. How does the consumer feel, right? Remember, open-hearted exploration. How do you feel about this product? If you do incremental build, yes, technically you will be doing logic steps. I'm going to put this tech block next to this tech block and, pile it together, but it will not feel intuitive to the consumer, to the end user. It will not feel as if the consumer can adapt to your product, to your application, right? So always remember, put the human and put your heart at the core of the hackathon. And with that, I'm going to say good luck at the hackathon and welcome any questions.
Yeah, I think I can ask a question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because you just talk about that, that we can win some maybe present and win some gift from the hackathons. So I want to know what the exact present and gift it is. I think this details is important for the participants. Yeah.
Huawei team, do you want to share what the prizes are?
Yes, for the best team, I think every team member could get the Watch Fit New. Yes, and for the lucky draw, we will have the Band 6. And every participant will have the paper certificate. Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. And I have my second question, because my major was in logistic engineering. It's talk about the engineering things, and also maybe somehow to relate to the mathematical modes. I want to know if engineering, this kind of majors want to relate to this hackathon game, what kind of team I can form, and do you have any suggestion, and have any people you can recommend to us?
So with engineering, or if you have a very maths heavy team, then the typical application would be something to do with operational research. So for example, anything that involves ordering a taxi or booking a restaurant, those types of problems would lend to maths operational research. But when you're going to the hackathon, oftentimes it's actually healthy practice to do something that you've never done before, that is out of your comfort zone, right? So if you are heavily into maths or physics or something like that, try to partner with somebody who is from social sciences, who does linguistics, and try to use the Huawei AI kit to learn about speech recognition and text translation. Now, this particular area is very interesting at the moment because, for example, President Obama was at Stanford University yesterday to discuss the problems with disinformation. So language processing is actually a mathematical problem, but it's also a humanities and creative problem. So potentially, if you learn this new area at the hackathon, once you graduate, what you've learned at the hackathon may be useful for employment opportunities. That's the other thing about hackathons, is that there are opportunities to learn about the technology stack that may be helpful for your employment. So don't necessarily just focus on the discipline that you're studying at the moment. Think in terms of what are the areas of technology, in particular within AI and AR and VR, where we actually need people who can solve problems creatively. So for example, to do with disinformation, to do with natural language processing.
So the problem and the proposals will give in advance, right? Like what kind of topics we can make, and the Huawei will give in advance to us so that we can choose one topic what we want to make some research. Is it?
Hi, Gira, could you please answer this question related to the techniques? Or maybe Hui, are you there?
Hello, hello.
Hi, hello.
So can you clarify what you mean? Because the question is.
Yeah, I mean, the topics of this hackathon, especially the hackathons 1 to 10, to have the topics, have the research, and then you will give us in advance, or should we find the topics by ourselves? I want to know this. I'm sorry.
You can prepare the topic by yourself first.
Okay.
Yeah.
But do you guys have the topics recommend that we can make? Like what kind of directions and what kind of topics of these hackathons main things, so that we can focus on more?
Actually, I think Huawei team could offer some topics according to the students' majors.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So first step is you find some similar majors, maybe classmates, to team up, and then tell Huawei what are your majors, and then we will help you to build a topic.
Okay, I got it. So it's a very random game. Like I can choose the topics by ourselves, and we also can get some suggestions from your guys, right?
Yes, yes, we will offer yes, technical support.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my
the idea is that you utilize our tools to make application, and the important point is to use the tool. The topic is like the purpose of your application is creative, is based on you. We don't restrict too much for you. Yeah. So for example, if you interest in AR, you can do games, for example. As long as you use HMS core, then it's valid. And as long as you like use it like creative and heavily, then you will be that will be a big bonus point.
Yeah. So the tools were offered by Huawei, and we need to use that kind of tools to design the application and different things, maybe the AI or AR, this kind of things for the main topics. And the main topics we can choose by ourselves, but we should use that restriction and tools from the Huawei, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much.
Can I just ask how many people have taken part in hackathons before in the audience? Have any of you done a hackathon before?
I think we did you ask how many people will participate in this hackathon event?
No, I wanted to know if anybody had done a hackathon before.
No.
Aha.
Yeah,
So
sorry to disturb you.
Everyone is a newbie.
I am.
Okay, this is good. So so remember that, you know, with the hackathon, a lot of the time it is simply to learn, you know, about the technology stack and, you know, with other people. Don't be intimidated. That's why on my slide, I said, all of us are shy. None of us knows everything. Most of the time, I can assure you, even I've been at hackathons where there are people who they're in their 30s, 40s, 50s. They will come to a hackathon. Some of them have never coded, but they will learn and they will enjoy the process. I did a workshop for women in AI when I was in San Francisco. And usually only 15 people will show up to a workshop. My workshop had 93 people show up. Many of them were women who had never coded before. They were in their 30s and 40s, and we had a lawyer who is in her late 50s. They had never coded, okay? Yet by the end of the workshop, every single one of them was able to build an app that could communicate with a NASA satellite and get the data, well, not directly with the NASA satellite, but essentially with NASA's database to pull satellite data, okay? So even if you have never coded, you should definitely go to the hackathon because you will get a lot of support and a lot of help from the Huawei team, as well as from each other, because there will always be somebody in the room who will know something, a little something, okay? Not all of us will know everything, but each of us will know a little something. And all of our little somethings in the hackathon will actually result in a product app, okay? Even if it doesn't result in a product app, we will have done some gracious learning during the hackathon. So bear that in mind. Even if you have never coded before and are not technical, make sure you go to the hackathon to meet people and to learn with people.
Thank you. I think I have a question regarding your presentation. It's very excellent presentation, but actually, would you mind to share some of your experience about what is the biggest challenge you ever meet in your hackathon event before?
Oh, if the hackathon event is very big, so, you know, if it's 1,000 people, for example,
yeah.
And sometimes you go into the room, and I've gone into hackathons where I have known nobody, right? I was at an Angel Hack hackathon in Silicon Valley, where I had to catch the train, you know, from San Francisco into Silicon Valley itself. I didn't know anybody. They all knew each other, right? So part of it is, if you go into hackathon and you don't know anybody, right? It can feel intimidating. And that is why on my slide, I encourage everybody to speak to the shy people, right? So maybe the person that they have never met, they don't know at all. Because that is you know, doing the icebreaker is actually the hardest thing. Of that initial icebreaker of meeting people is actually the hardest thing. The rest of it, the rest of the hackathon is actually easy, okay? Because once you've actually broken the ice and spoken to all the shy people, you can actually figure out, you know, what product and what technologies you want to learn together. So that's what I would say, is that first initial thing if you go into hackathon and you don't know anybody. So that's why I encourage everybody to speak to the shyest people, because I have been in that situation where I went into a room and maybe I was the only female engineer, or I went there because, you know, I'm not from that sort of, whether it's because, you know, they're from the same university, and I'm not from their university, but I go to the hackathon. So always speak to the shyest people in the room, make people feel welcome, because once you actually start the conversation and do the icebreaker with somebody, you will end up with a product and, you know, a learning process for your team.
Yeah, thank you. I think at least I'm not a social person. If no one come to me and talk to me, I would never speak to anyone.
See, so this is the example, right? So all of us are shy in some way.
Yeah.
So that's why I say the hardest thing in the hackathon is that initial icebreaker and, you know, talking to people. One of the hackathons, the Fleur hackathon, actually, again, I was the only person in the room who didn't know anybody else in the room. And I overheard 3 of the guys behind me, and they were from Imperial College. And their idea, it was really funny because their idea for the Fleur lens was that they would make a wearable for the Fleur lens and attach it, and if they were watching Netflix and they fell asleep, somehow the wearable should be able to alert, you know, sound an alert and say, you've fallen asleep whilst watching Netflix. That was their idea, right? So they were discussing this and I didn't know them. But then I turned around and I said, hello. It's something as simple as this. I said, hello, okay? And I said, I don't know anybody here, but your idea is a little bit crazy, but I can't see a consumer. I can't see it being useful for consumer or anybody like this. What if we made a wearable for, you know, visually impaired person? Because if it's an infrared lens, then that's the best utility, right? So the shyest person in the room may have the idea for the app that is better than yours, or that maybe will enable you to learn how to do product idea development differently. So always speak to the shyest people in the room. Remember, open-hearted exploration is principle number 2.
Yeah, just one more question regarding the kind of trade-off between the business and the technology. Did you ever say in your experience any group before they showed a really good marketing plan and business plan, but they didn't do that well at the technology aspect?
No.
All of them are very good at the technology, at the product, but they didn't give a very clear marketing plan, right?
No. So with the hackathon,
yeah.
The objective is to build as much of a prototype as you can, because you have the opportunity with HMS Core, you have the opportunity with MapKit, you have the opportunity with Location Kit. you have the opportunity essentially to show that you can build something, even if it's not complete, right? The business, if you have just a business plan, that never ever wins. It's never won at any hackathon that I've ever been to. There have been winning apps where they might not have everything integrated between the front end and the back end, right? So sometimes what can happen is that they might have a brilliant front-end engineer with them who can code it just so that it is on their local browser, right? And so they have a mock-up, but there's no integration with the backend. So there is no data being pulled from the database and surfaced onto the user interface. But nobody at any hackathon I've been to has ever won just by showing, you know, this is the business plan and this is how we're going to build the app.
Yeah, thank you.
The most important thing for the hackathon is always ask questions. There are no questions that are too stupid to ask. Always ask stupid questions, in fact, because all of us, in some ways or other, don't know. So always ask questions, because the more questions that you ask, either because you don't know the stack, or because you, in terms of, you know, the technologies or what product that you can build or who the end user is, nobody knows all of those answers, but we must be able to ask as many questions as possible and not be afraid to ask those questions, because the Huawei team will be there to support as many of the teams as possible. And it's a learning process for the students, for Huawei team, for all of us, because ultimately, the more gracious learning that we do, right, the better the products that we build for humans and for sustainability, right? So remember this as the ethos. Always ask questions. Never assume that there are any stupid questions. There are never, ever any stupid questions. I remember going into one hackathon where I had no idea, right, why we were building what we needed to build. So it was a hackathon for Unilever. And again, I didn't know anybody in the room. They all knew each other. They were all prepared with, you know, with their idea of their applications. And I ended up building essentially a vision recognition application where you could put the camera next to any shampoo bottle or sort of anything that was in your bathroom cabinet. And it would essentially do vision recognition of the barcode and then surface all of the types of information that was pulled onto the screen about that particular product and what prices were at different retailers. But before I, you know, went into the hackathon, I had absolutely no idea about the Unilever technology stack, because they had literally just created Foundry. So then I spent a lot of the time asking questions because I didn't know. So remember this, ask many questions. Do not be afraid of asking many questions. Ask each other questions, because part of the hackathon is sharing knowledge between each other. The objective of the hackathon is not necessarily to win these amazing watches. I mean, they're amazing watches, but remember to set the expectation that hackathons are about gracious learning. And that's why it's best to ask a lot of questions, particularly if you've never done a hackathon before. And don't be intimidated by the process.
Thank you. If anyone has more questions, if not, we can join the lucky draw session.